Kajara Fraze was a 22-year-old from Moreno Valley, California, who was 35 weeks pregnant when she vanished under eerie circumstances in early 2023. Late on the evening of February 23, 2023, Kajara and her parents were driving to visit her grandmother when they decided to stop for a quick meal. They pulled into the drive-thru of a Jack in the Box restaurant on Beaumont Avenue in the city of Beaumont around 10:30 p.m. As they waited in the drive-thru line, Kajara suddenly asked to get out of the van to get some fresh air, which her parents found unusual but didn't object to. According to Kara, her mother, Kajara stepped out of the vehicle and walked a short distance to the front of the drive-thru lane, carrying only her Bible with her. She left behind her purse and cell phone in the back seat of the car, suggesting she hadn't planned a long absence. Kajara's father, Jamal, continued to inch the car forward in line to pay for their order while keeping an eye on his daughter. But in a matter of minutes, Kajara was gone. After Jamal paid and the car pulled up again, they realized their daughter was no longer visible near the drive-thru. Alarmed, Kajara's parents immediately grabbed their food and circled around to search for her. They looked in the parking lot, inside the fast food restaurant, and around the immediate area, but there was no sign of Kajara. By 10:40 p.m., they knew something was very wrong, and they called 911 to report her missing. Beaumont police officers responded and began a search of the area that night. Local authorities launched an extensive investigation into Kajara's disappearance. Early on, police classified her as a voluntary missing adult, since she was of age and had reportedly walked away on her own accord. Nonetheless, given her pregnancy, detectives took the case seriously and began gathering any clues they could. They canvassed the area for witnesses and sought out surveillance video from nearby businesses. Unfortunately, a significant delay occurred in retrieving security camera footage from the restaurant and surrounding establishments. By the time investigators went to pull the videos, nearly a month later, most of the recordings had been overwritten and lost. The only useful footage came from a security camera at a nearby school, which captured an image of Kajara walking by herself. She was heading south through the parking lot and moving away from the fast food joint. In that video, she was wearing the same clothes her parents described and appeared to be walking purposefully, though it's unclear where she was heading. Over the following days and weeks, Beaumont police and partner agencies carried out extensive searches on the ground and by air. Officers and volunteers combed the area on foot and with K-9 units, while drones, helicopters, and even airplanes surveyed the wider region. Authorities also checked with local hospitals and clinics for any woman matching Kajara's description who might have come in to give birth, since her due date was approaching. Alerts with her information were sent to medical facilities, shelters, and mental health centers in all surrounding counties. Investigators also analyzed her social media activity and phone records for any hints of her plans or communications around the time she disappeared. Kajara's place of employment and other frequented locations were checked as well, but nothing turned up. Crucially, no transactions or sightings of Kajara have been recorded since that night, and it was as if she fell off the face of the earth. In a March 8, 2023 press release, Beaumont police noted that the family was not cooperatively working with detectives to provide additional information. Kajara's mother strongly disputed this characterization by the police. In a statement to local media, Kara insisted that the family had cooperated 100% with Beaumont detectives. Notably, having reviewed the Beaumont press release, they do not say that the family is not working with police, but rather that they aren't working with them cooperatively. This is very strange language on the part of the investigators, because they're explicitly not saying that the family hasn't been providing information. Reading between the lines, I suspect this statement by the Beaumont police is extremely poorly worded and reflects the difference in views between the family and the cops. At any rate, Kara was frustrated by the implication that they were hindering the case and suggested instead that the police response was too slow in the crucial early hours. Kara alleged that officers were slow to officially file the missing person report and lacked urgency on the night of February 23rd. She believes that this resulted in nearly all the surveillance video in the area expiring before it could be reviewed. This loss of potential evidence has been a sore point, as it closed off one of the best chances to track Kajara's movements immediately after she walked away. Kajara's mom makes an absolutely excellent point here. I simply don't see how the surveillance camera evidence wasn't obtained on the night in question given the urgency of the situation. More than 2 years have passed since Kajara Frey's disappeared, and in the absence of concrete answers, several theories have emerged about what might have happened. Importantly, investigators have not identified any suspects or confirmed any specific theory. One possibility is that Kajara left of her own accord to start a new life. Police initially treated her case as a voluntary missing adult, since witnesses, her parents, saw her walking away under her own power, and there were no immediate signs of struggle. It's conceivable she was overwhelmed by the impending birth and decided to run away. However, many find this theory unlikely given her excitement about the baby and the fact that she left behind personal items like her phone and purse. Further, authorities also found no evidence of her establishing a new identity, using credit cards, or contacting friends after February 23rd. Some believe she may have been suffering a medical or mental health emergency that night, which could explain her sudden decision to leave. As some have mentioned in online forums such as Reddit, psychosis can arise as a result of pregnancy and can also just generally come to the surface around one's early 20s. Kara has mentioned that her daughter might have been in a distressed or confused state of mind when she stepped out of the car. Under this scenario, Kajara could have wandered off disoriented and possibly sought shelter or help from a stranger. The fact that she took only her Bible with her might indicate she was seeking some sort of comfort. If she did experience a mental health crisis, one fear is that she could have become lost or injured in the cold night. Kajara's mother strongly suspects that someone else became involved after her daughter walked away. This theory suggests that an opportunistic predator encountered Kajara when she left the drive-thru. Given Kajara's vulnerable condition, it's conceivable someone coerced her into a vehicle. To date, police say they have no evidence that Kajara was abducted or met with foul play, and unfortunately, that's where her case stands today. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder that there's a Patreon available if you want to support the channel further and get your name on the shout-out list. Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and share this video with your friends or family, or hey, maybe just your cat or dog. In August 1962, 30-year-old Joan Ellen Hansen vanished from King County, Washington. And just as a quick preface here, prepare to be pissed off by how the authorities quote-unquote handled this case. Hansen was a mother of 4 who had been planning to meet her family at the Seattle World's Fair that weekend, but she never showed up. Her sudden disappearance launched an investigation that spanned decades. What began as a missing person case soon turned into a suspected foul play scenario centering on her estranged husband. Joan Hansen's life in 1962 was marked by domestic turmoil. She was in the process of divorcing her husband, Bob Hansen, due to his violent temper. Fearing for her safety, Joan had moved in with a close friend, Patricia Martin, in May 1962, and essentially went into hiding. By August 1962, Joan had taken legal steps to protect herself, securing a restraining order on August 8th that required Robert to move out of their home so she could move back in safely. The stage was set for a confrontation, as the couple had been battling over assets and custody, and tensions were at a peak. On Friday, August 10th, 1962, Joan returned to the family home to gather some of her belongings, believing Robert was absent due to the restraining order. That afternoon, she was on the phone with Patricia Martin, who was checking on her. At first, Joan reported that she was fine and that Robert wasn't there. Suddenly, during the call, Joan exclaimed, "Oh my God, he's in the basement! He's coming!" and began screaming before the line went dead. Martin frantically tried to call back. Initially, there was no answer, but after several attempts, Bob Hansen picked up the phone. When the worried friend demanded to know Joan's whereabouts, Bob exclaimed expressionlessly, "She's with you," and hung up. This chilling phone call would be the last time anyone heard from Joan Hansen. She failed to meet her mother and sisters at the World's Fair the next day, where they even had her paged over the loudspeakers in vain. So yeah, you're sitting there thinking, this one doesn't take Sherlock Holmes, right? Well, this case is unsolved till this day, so apparently it does. King County Sheriff's deputies opened a missing persons case and issued an all-points bulletin, while Joan's parents hired a private detective to look for her. An extensive search of the area was conducted, but no trace of Joan was found. In the weeks following her disappearance, a major break in the case appeared to come when Joan's car was discovered abandoned in Seattle's Queen Anne Hill neighborhood. The vehicle's condition was suspicious. The normally tidy car was found with its windows rolled down, tires flat, and interior littered with debris like empty bottles. There were no usable fingerprints or obvious signs of foul play in the car, but its state was utterly unlike how Joan kept it, suggesting it had been dumped there to mislead investigators. Despite this clue, forensic techniques of the era were limited. Investigators couldn't pull any concrete evidence from the vehicle or the home, and no body was found. Joan Hansen had effectively vanished without a trace, and by November 1962, her attorney proceeded with the divorce in her absence. A court granted the divorce, awarding her 40% of the marital property to be held in trust for her children if she didn't return alive. Nevertheless, with Joan missing, Robert eventually assumed control of all the assets, and the children received nothing from their mother's share. In 1975, a judge formally declared Joan Hansen legally deceased, though her body was never recovered. From early on, suspicion in Joan's disappearance centered squarely on Robert Hansen. He was the last person known to have seen or spoken to her, and police considered him a person of interest in the case. However, in 1962, there was insufficient evidence to charge him. The case was essentially a suspected slaying without a body or direct proof. Robert maintained that Joan had simply left. He denied doing anything untoward to her, and even floated the claim that she'd stolen $8,000 from him before disappearing. To their two young children, Robert insisted that their mother had run off with another man and abandoned the family. Initially, even Joan's children believed this story, holding out hope that she might still be alive somewhere. Over the years, though, a different narrative became widely accepted. Friends, family, and later the children themselves came to believe that Joan had been slain on that August day and that Bob was responsible for it. Persistent local rumor held that Robert had disposed of Joan's remains on a rural property the Hansen family owned in the Kent Valley near the Green River. The story went that her body might be buried beneath a barn that conveniently got a new concrete floor around the time she went missing. This theory intrigued investigators and the Hansen children enough that in 2006, police revisited the case to test it. Acting on a request from Joan's son, cold case detectives used ground-penetrating radar to scan the area where the old barn had stood. Unfortunately, the search found no anomalies or evidence of a burial, and the barn rumor remains unconfirmed. Complicating matters is the fact that the old barn had been destroyed to make way for a roadway in the intervening years. There's always the possibility that Jones' remains could have been disrupted or otherwise destroyed in the construction process. Aside from that lead, no alternate suspects or credible theories ever emerged, and all signs consistently pointed back to Robert Hansen. His history after Jones' disappearance further fueled suspicions. In the years that followed, Robert was arrested multiple times for violent outbursts and assaults. In one disturbing incident, he lured a woman with a classified ad for a job and then held her captive on his property for 3 days until she managed to escape. His propensity for violence was so notorious that for a time police even investigated whether Bob Hansen may have been linked to any number of unsolved slayings in the region. Disturbingly, Joan Hansen's disappearance received only modest press attention in 1962, largely as a local missing person report. I suspect that if her case had gotten the attention it deserved, the authorities may have looked a little more closely at Bob. In August 2009, Bob Hansen decided to delete himself from existence, still never having faced any charges related to Joan's fate. In a final act of spite, his will noted Joan had disappeared and left instructions that if she were somehow alive, she was to inherit nothing. He also disinherited his children entirely from his estate, which was worth $5 million. This development spurred Joan's 2 sons to seek a form of justice on their mother's behalf. In December 2009, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against their father's estate, essentially accusing him in civil court of having slain Joan back in 1962. The wrongful death suit never produced a courtroom showdown, as the defendant was deceased after all. However, in 2010, a judge did award the siblings $100,000 in damages from Bob's estate. While effectively symbolic, this was effectively an acknowledgement that Bob Hansen was likely responsible for Joan's death. Anyway, I wish I had something profound to say about this case, but the system just completely failed Joan here. All evidence pointed to the involvement of Bob Hansen, and despite this, the police apparently took virtually no meaningful action against him at the time of the crime. The part that's most confusing to me is that this isn't a case where there was no evidence that the authorities could have used to drill down on Bob back in '62. Patricia Martin, Joan's friend, was literally on the phone when Joan was ambushed by Bob. On the morning of March 10th, 1959, a shocking discovery in a Tokyo river set off one of Japan's most infamous unsolved cases. The body of 27-year-old Tomoko Takakawa, a stewardess for British Overseas Airways Corporation, was found floating face up near a bridge in the Zenpukuji River in Suganami Ward. Born around 1932 in Ashiya City in Hyogo Prefecture, she was raised as part of the country's Catholic minority. And trust me when I say that this factor will be important, so keep it in mind. After high school, she moved to Tokyo to attend the Seibo Junior College of Nursing, a school run by Catholic officials, and later worked back in her hometown as a nurse. Takakawa even became engaged, but her parents did not approve of the marriage, leading her to return to Tokyo for a fresh start. There she took a job at St. Adelia's nursery in Nakano Ward, staying connected to the Catholic community in the city. Ambitious and seeking a new career path, Tomoko set her sights on the burgeoning airline industry. Her uncle worked for British Overseas Airways, and through a process in late 1958, she succeeded in being hired as a flight attendant. In fact, Takakawa was one of only 8 Japanese women selected out of 300 applicants. She was thus among the first group of Japanese stewardesses for the prestigious international airline. She underwent training in London and returned to Tokyo on February 27, 1959, preparing for her first assignment. That first scheduled flight was to be on the Tokyo-Hong Kong route on March 13, 1959. Unfortunately, Tomoko Takakawa would never make that flight. Just days before her official debut, she disappeared and was soon found to have become the victim of a heinous crime. Tomoko Takakawa was last seen alive on Sunday, March 8, 1959. That morning she attended Mass, as she did regularly as a devout Catholic. She then had lunch at her uncle's home near the church. Around 3 p.m., she told family she was going to attend a friend's birthday party in the Ushigomi area of Shinjuku Ward. After that, Tomoko never returned. When she failed to show up for work or home, concern grew. 2 days later, on March 10th, a male office worker spotted something suspicious floating in the shallow Zenpukuji River in western Tokyo. Upon closer examination, he realized that this was a body and alerted the authorities immediately. Police arrived and identified the body as Tomoko Takakawa after finding several of her personal belongings scattered on the riverbank nearby. At first, investigators considered the possibility of an accident, or that the act was committed intentionally, since there were no obvious external wounds on the body. However, an autopsy at Keio University Hospital quickly dispelled those notions. The medical examiner found only a small amount of water in Takakawa's lungs, indicating she had not died by drowning. Instead, subtle marks around her neck suggested she was strangled. In other words, Tomoko had likely been slain before being placed in the water. The autopsy also uncovered forensic evidence. Traces of evidence from 2 different men were found on her body. This discovery prompted police to broaden their inquiry and seek out information on all the men in Tomoko's recent life. Very quickly, one name emerged as a focal point of the investigation. One of the first major leads came from Tomoko Takekawa's personal notebook and her activities in the days before her death. Investigators discovered the name Father Louis Charles Vermeersch, written in her notebook. Vermeersch was a 38-year-old Catholic priest from Belgium who had been living in Tokyo since 1948. At the time, he worked as head of accounting at a Catholic publishing house affiliated with a church in Suganami Ward, the same ward where Tomoko's body was found. Police learned that on March 7th, just a day before Tomoko vanished, a special delivery parcel from that Catholic publisher had arrived at the airline dormitory where she lived. Investigators believed this package contained a letter from Father Vermeersch requesting to meet with Tomoko. In fact, Tomoko was reportedly carrying that very letter when she left for the birthday party on March 8th. But when her body was recovered 2 days later, the letter was missing. This strongly suggested she did go to meet the priest on the day she disappeared, and that the letter might have been taken by whoever ended her. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Father Vermeersch soon became the prime person of interest in the case. The Catholic priest voluntarily cooperated with police questioning, though the situation was delicate. In April 1959, rumors swirled that the priest had fled Japan. But in reality, he agreed to multiple interrogation sessions in Tokyo. He was accompanied by a Vatican representative and a lawyer sent to protect his rights. A veteran detective, famed for tackling high-profile cases, led the questioning. During these interviews, Father Vermeersch admitted that he had met with Tomoko and even took her to a hotel in the Harajuku area of Tokyo on March 5th, just days before her disappearance. He insisted that the hotel visit was for a quote-unquote consultation, which unsurprisingly raised major red flags for investigators. Despite his denials, police grew convinced that Tomoko and the priest had in fact had relations contrary to his clerical vows. Evidence surfaced indicating they had been in a relationship even before she landed the stewardess job in late 1958. This contradicted the priest's claims of a purely pastoral or platonic connection. Several other findings bolstered the suspicions around Father Vermeersch. Witnesses came forward with a number of intriguing statements. A female employee at a small, seedy hotel on Takashita Street in Harajuku recalled seeing a foreign man check in around March 5th. This was a notable event at the time, since foreign visitors were rare in that area. When shown a photograph of Father Vermeersch, she confirmed he was the foreign guest she had seen at the hotel. This corroborated the priest's own admission that he had been with Tomoko at a hotel that week, suggesting a secret meeting. A resident living near the bridge where Tomoko's corpse was discovered reported noticing a white sedan parked by the riverside around 5 a.m. on March 10th. Father Vermeersch happened to drive a white Renault sedan, again raising concerns amongst investigators. When police showed this witness a catalog of car models, she pointed to a Renault identical to the one the priest drove. Investigators later heard that the priest had the tires on his car replaced soon after the incident. This is a detail some found suspicious, as if he might have been trying to erase evidence related to potential tire tracks. Tomoko's autopsy revealed her last meal had been a Chinese-style dinner consumed not long before her death. Among the contents of her stomach were mushrooms cut in a distinctive manner. Police traced these to a canned food product sold at a shop outside a local train station and found a clerk who remembered selling them to a man resembling Father Vermeersch. And personally, something about this aspect of the investigation seems, to phrase it delicately, a bit too perfect. To recognize the specific cut of a specific mushroom and then tie it back to a specific store and then get the guy to say the priest bought it is a little too CSI for me. Investigators also looked into Father Vermeersch's reputation and behavior. Detectives learned that the priest had a history of getting overly familiar with women working at the Catholic nursery where Tomoko had been employed. According to media reports, he was seen embracing female staff and even allegedly doing much more with some of the young women. These accusations of impropriety cast a shadow on his character and made the idea of a secret affair with Tomoko more plausible. Despite this array of circumstantial evidence, there were challenges in building a solid case. Father Vermeersch maintained his innocence and was never formally charged with any crime. He had alibis for the critical time frame around March 8th to 10th, claiming he was elsewhere when Tomoko went missing and when her body was dumped. However, all his alibi witnesses were fellow clergy or church associates, which made police skeptical of their objectivity. That said, he was a Catholic priest, so the fact that for a short period of time, all his close associates who could vouch for him were Catholics is perhaps not that suspicious. By April 1959, inside information on the investigation had leaked to the public, and attention on Father Vermeersch intensified. On April 12th, a television program on NHK called Japan Unmasked even showed the priest's portrait photo pinned up at an immigration office. Other news outlets quickly picked up the story. The sensational nature of the crime made headlines, and public sentiment began to turn against the foreign priest. The Catholic Church in Japan, however, closed ranks in support of Father Vermeersch. He never made any public statements himself, but church officials spoke on his behalf. Maximilian von Furstenberg, the Vatican ambassador to Japan at the time, gave a comment declaring his solemn conviction that the priest was fully innocent. This public defense highlighted the sensitive diplomatic and religious dimensions of the case. Internationally, the handling of the investigation drew some criticism as well. News of the case made significant waves in America as well. In early June 1959, Congressman Frank Boe stood before the U.S. House of Representatives and read aloud an English-language editorial from a Japanese newspaper. The writer noted that the priest had been hounded publicly by the police for weeks on end and effectively had his reputation ruined without ever being charged with a crime. The congressman echoed the article's concern that a man could be subjected to intense suspicion in the press with no recourse since no formal charges were filed. Notably, just 6 months after the crime, a movie was released depicting the priest slaying Tomoko, capturing popular sentiment at the time. This movie was sensationalistic and extremely popular, but was pulled from theaters after it caused an international incident and concern from both Japanese Catholics and church officials. Over the years, several theories have been proposed to explain who ended Tomoko Takekawa and why, though none have been proven. The primary theory during the initial investigation was that Father Vermeersch was indeed the perpetrator, acting either out of passion, panic, or some other personal motive. Perhaps Tomoko wanted to end the relationship or threatened to expose it, leading the priest to commit extreme violence against her. This theory casts the crime as a tragic culmination of an illicit romance, and it was reinforced by the various witness accounts tying the priest to Tomoko's last known activities. However, lacking a confession or definitive proof, alternative theories have also emerged. One major line of speculation involves criminal smuggling as a motive. In late 1960, a Japanese mystery writer, Seicho Matsumoto, published a novel titled Black Gospel, loosely based on the Takekawa case. In Matsumoto's fictional retelling, the priest character enlists the flight attendant to help smuggle illicit substances, and he ultimately has to silence her permanently. This imaginative theory introduced the idea that Tomoko's slaying might have been connected to some trade using airline staff as couriers. Interestingly, around that same time, the airline she had worked for was dealing with very real-life smuggling issues among its employees. In 1960, a gold smuggling scandal was uncovered that led to 27 employees being dismissed for their involvement. Tomoko had been scheduled to work the Tokyo-Hong Kong flight, a route that, as later reports noted, was a known corridor for smugglers, in the week of her slaying. This coincidence led some to wonder if she might have stumbled onto a smuggling operation or been recruited to participate in one. Another unresolved question that feeds various theories is the presence of DNA from a second man on Tomoko's body. Police never identified who the second individual was or whether he had any role in the crime. This opens the door to theories that perhaps someone else, possibly a different lover or an unknown assailant, was with Tomoko around the time of her death. If Father Vermeersch was innocent, the real perpetrator could have been this other man whose biological evidence was found. Was Tomoko seeing another man, or had she been assaulted by someone other than the priest? Unfortunately, the investigation didn't publicly pursue any specific alternate suspect, which, given the evidence which was found on her, sounds fairly negligent. Some critics have wondered if the focus on the foreign priest caused authorities and media to overlook other leads or potential Japanese suspects. Given the lack of information on any other persons of interest, the identity and involvement of the second man remains a mystery within the wider mystery. By June 1959, after months of enduring suspicion, Father Vermeersch took the opportunity to leave Japan. On June 10, 1959, 3 days before he was due for a sixth round of police questioning, he appeared at Haneda Airport seeking to depart the country. Alerted by immigration officials, police officials debated what to do. In the end, because there was no arrest warrant or charges filed, they had no legal grounds to hold him. The priest was permitted to board an Air France flight out of Japan the next day, June 11th. Before departure, a reporter on the same plane got a brief comment from Vermeersch. He said the church had ordered him back to Belgium and that he wished to see his aging parents, but he professed willingness to cooperate with Japanese authorities. Once he left, however, he never returned to Japan, and he never further cooperated with Japanese officials. The departure of the primary suspect caused an uproar in Japan. Father Vermeersch settled overseas, in eastern Canada by 1960, and lived out the rest of his long life quietly. In March 2017, he passed away at the age of 96 in New Brunswick, Canada. Unsurprisingly, his obituary in a local Canadian newspaper made no mention of the Tomoko Takekawa case, reflecting perhaps that he was never officially charged or convicted of anything. After years of investigation without resolution, police formally closed the case on March 10, 1974, exactly 15 years after Tomoko Takakawa's slaying. Under Japanese law at the time, the statute of limitations for the crime was 15 years, meaning that by that date, no one could be charged even if new evidence emerged. The case was labeled unsolved, and the files were shelved. In the decades since, no conclusive new evidence has come to light that would identify the perpetrator or perpetrators. The physical evidence collected was never matched to a perpetrator, and it's unclear if it's still available given the fact that the case was closed. In my view, the initial investigation into Tomoko Takakawa's case was severely compromised by tunnel vision, intense media scrutiny, and international pressure, resulting in critical missteps. Police quickly fixated on Vermeersch due to his controversial relationship with Tomoko, neglecting other significant leads. The most obvious of these leads is the evidence from the second unidentified male found on her body. Evidence was mishandled or ignored, potential witnesses inadequately questioned, and the focus on the priest overshadowed other credible theories. With Vermeersch's departure from Japan, crucial investigative momentum dissipated, ensuring key evidence vanished and leaving enduring doubts. In my view, due to these fundamental investigative errors, the identity of the perpetrator will remain forever uncertain. That said, maybe this didn't fully come down to investigative errors, but also high-level political intervention. On the morning of March 21, 1977, Honolulu police were called to McKinley High School. At 7:30 that morning, a teacher had discovered a shocking sight: the body of 16-year-old Dawn Momohara on the second floor of a building on the campus. She was found lying on her back, partially clothed, with an orange cloth tightly wrapped around her neck. An autopsy confirmed that Dawn had been strangled. Investigators determined that Dawn had last spoken to her mother the previous day after receiving a phone call from an unknown male. Dawn told her mother she was going to a nearby shopping center with friends and never returned home. Police launched an intensive investigation in 1977, interviewing students, staff, and anyone who might have seen Dawn before her death. A witness reported seeing Dawn on the campus the night before, getting into a car near the school's English building. The car was described as a distinctive 1974 or 1975 Pontiac Le Mans with a maroon body and white vinyl top, which had been spotted parked on the grass near the building. The witness and his girlfriend noticed a man with the vehicle. When they circled back for a closer look, both the car and the man were gone. Investigators released composite sketches of a person of interest and the possible vehicle based on these descriptions. Within a week of the slaying, police questioned two brothers, William and Gideon Castro, who were former McKinley students, known to have interacted with Dawn. William Castro admitted he'd last seen Dawn just 3 days before her slaying when she passed by his house. He offered her a ride to school, which she declined. Gideon, who had graduated from McKinley in 1976, stated he knew Dawn from a dance and recalled last seeing her in February 1977. Despite these interviews, at the time there was no direct evidence linking the Castro brothers, or anyone else, to the crime. Police had the sketches and some physical evidence from the scene, but 1970s forensic technology was limited. No suspect was conclusively identified in 1977, and Dawn's case began to stall out. As months turned into years, the investigation into Dawn Momohara's slaying went cold. It was only with advancements in forensic science that Dawn's case saw new hope. In 2019, 42 years after the slaying, Honolulu cold case detectives revisited the evidence from 1977. Several pieces of Dawn's clothing retained from the crime scene were submitted for modern DNA analysis. By May 2020, a crime lab was able to develop a partial DNA profile of an unknown male from material on Dawn's clothing. Detectives then turned to genealogical DNA techniques to find potential matches, though since the technology was very new at the time, progress was slow. In 2023, the DNA evidence yielded a crucial lead. Analysts identified two possible suspects who were biologically compatible with the crime scene DNA. These were the same Castro brothers who had been interviewed back in 1977. Investigators proceeded methodically to confirm which of the brothers actually matched the DNA. In November 2023, Honolulu police traveled to Chicago, where William Castro was living, and surreptitiously obtained a DNA sample from one of William's adult children. Importantly, testing confirmed that William didn't directly match the DNA from the crime scene, effectively ruling him out. Attention then turned fully to Gideon Castro. Evidence showed that Gideon's biological son's DNA was consistent with being the child of whoever left the DNA on Dawn's clothing. Absolute confirmation was obtained when Gideon's DNA was directly proven to be a direct match soon afterwards. In January 2025, armed with the DNA evidence, Honolulu authorities issued a warrant for Gideon Castro's arrest on a charge of second-degree slaying. Castro was located in Mill Creek, Utah, just outside Salt Lake City, where he had been living in a nursing home in poor health. On January 23, 2025, police in Utah, working with Honolulu detectives, arrested Gideon Castro at the nursing facility, nearly 48 years after Dawn's life was brutally taken. He was held on a fugitive warrant from Hawaii, with bail set at $250,000 as he awaited extradition. At a court hearing in Salt Lake City the following month, Gideon Castro appeared via video from a hospital bed and waived his right to challenge extradition, agreeing to be sent back to Hawaii. Notably, his defense attorney stated that despite not fighting extradition, Gideon intends to plead not guilty to the charges. This case shows the overwhelming investigative power of forensic genealogy techniques. Without this technological breakthrough, there would have been no way for the authorities to ever get justice for Dawn and her family. While this justice has sadly taken almost half a century, it's better late than never. That said, there's still a lot of unknowns about Dawn's case, and I hope to have an update as to why this act occurred in an upcoming episode.